On the night of June 11th, 1962, in the infamous Alcatraz prison, also known as the Rock, a place the world believed to be escape-proof, 3 inmates decided to challenge the impossible. Armed with nothing but primitive tools, they planned and executed one of the boldest escapes in modern history, leaving the world stunned. But how did they manage to widen those tiny ventilation shafts? How did they build a raft using nothing but simple, everyday materials? And what happened to them after they disappeared into the cold waters of San Francisco Bay? Did they actually pull off the impossible and reach freedom, or did they meet their fate in the icy currents of the bay? Welcome to today's video, The Great Escape from Alcatraz. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Let's go back to 1934, when Alcatraz Island was transformed from a military base into a high-security federal prison. Because of its location, right in the middle of San Francisco Bay, it earned the nickname The Rock. The prison was designed to be inescapable, and history had proven that point through a series of failed escape attempts over the years. Alcatraz was meant to house the most dangerous criminals in America, men no other prison could handle. That's why the security was so intense. Watchtowers and floodlights scanned every inch of the island, day and night. Guards were highly trained and alert, 24/7. The corridors were lined with motion sensors and alarms. Any suspicious movement would trigger an immediate response. Even the waters surrounding the island were part of the prison's defenses. The bay's waters were freezing cold all year round, with powerful currents that could drag anyone away in seconds. On top of that, rumors spread about sharks lurking in the depths, making the idea of swimming away feel like certain death. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison. It was a symbol of fear and hopelessness. Inmates who served time there often spoke of the despair and terror that haunted them daily. Thick concrete walls, tiny, cramped cells, endless, sleepless nights, and the constant sound of waves crashing against the rocky island shore. It felt more like a nightmare than a prison. That's why any escape attempt was seen as madness. From the moment it opened in 1934, many tried to flee Alcatraz, but most ended up either dead or quickly recaptured. Each failed attempt only added to the prison's terrifying reputation that escaping was impossible, and filled the hearts of inmates with more and more despair. Let me tell you about some of the most famous failed escape attempts, just to show you how impossible it really was to break out of Alcatraz. The first known escape attempt happened in 1936. A prisoner named Joseph Bowers was assigned to burn trash at the prison's incinerator. On April 27th, while doing his usual duties, he suddenly made a run for it and started climbing the barbed wire fence at the edge of the island. It was clear he was trying to escape. Guards in the watchtower saw what was happening and immediately shouted at him to come down. But Joseph didn't stop. He kept climbing. So, the guards opened fire. He was hit, and the gunshot caused him to fall from a great height. The fall was brutal. He suffered serious injuries and later died. His story became known as the desperate escape, a symbol of how far some inmates were willing to go, risking everything for a shot at freedom. Just a year later, on December 16, 1937, 2 inmates, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, were working in the prison's workshop. Over a long period of time, they managed to saw through the metal bars on a window. Then, one day, the island was completely covered in thick fog. Visibility was near zero. That was the moment they'd been waiting for. They slipped out through the window and made their way to the island's edge. Then, they jumped into the freezing bay. From that moment on, no one ever saw them again. But here's the thing. That day wasn't just foggy. The weather was extremely harsh. The tides were violent, and the freezing water was nearly impossible to survive. Authorities assumed they drowned, but since their bodies were never found, some believed the currents simply dragged them away. Still, just in case, the FBI added them to the most wanted list. Almost a year later, on Friday the 13th of January 1939, another escape attempt took place, one that ended in tragedy. 5 inmates, Arthur Barker, William Martin, Rufus McCain, Henry Young, and Dale Stamphill, were known as some of the most dangerous prisoners in Alcatraz. They were being held in the most secure section of the entire prison. But even with all that security, one day, they managed to escape their cells, using makeshift tools they had crafted themselves. After breaking out, they moved quickly and quietly toward the island's shoreline. Their plan? To build a raft using scraps and materials they had secretly gathered over time. Once they reached the shore, they began assembling the raft, getting ready to flee. But while they were working, guards in the watchtower spotted unusual movement near the water. The moment the guards realized what was happening, they opened fire from all directions. Arthur Barker was fatally shot and died on the spot. Dale Stamphill was seriously wounded, but survived. The remaining 3 were captured shortly after and placed in complete isolation. From that point on, security around them became even tighter than before. In the following years, there were a few minor escape attempts, but all of them failed, until one day. On April 14, 1943, a daring escape was attempted by 4 more inmates working in the prison's workshop.
The 4 inmates were James Borman, Harold Brest, Floyd Hamilton, and Fred Hunter. While working in the prison's workshop, they carried out a familiar plan. They sawed through the bars on the workshop windows, little by little, over time. They also stole 4 laundry bags, the kind used to carry guards' uniforms, planning to use them as makeshift flotation devices during their escape. On the night of the escape, they attacked 2 guards, tied them up, gagged them, and made their way out through the window. But during the escape, one of the guards managed to loosen his gag. The second guard grabbed the whistle and blew it. The moment the tower guards heard the whistle, they opened fire on the escaping prisoners. James Borman was shot and fell into the water, losing consciousness. Harold Brest swam after him and tried to keep him afloat using one of the bags. But as a prison boat approached, Brest had no choice but to let him go, hoping he could still make it. Borman drowned, and his body was never recovered. Meanwhile, Fred Hunter was shot in the back and arms. Unable to swim, he crawled into a small cave on the island to hide. But within 2 hours, guards tracked him down, thanks to a trail of blood at the cave's entrance. They surrounded the area, and Hunter surrendered immediately. That left only Floyd Hamilton. At first, guards assumed he had drowned, just like Borman, but the truth was more surprising. Hamilton was hiding in the same cave where Hunter had been. For 2 full days, he stayed there, hoping for a chance to escape. Eventually, overwhelmed by hopelessness and exhaustion, he made his way back to the workshop window he'd escaped from and hid in a nearby storage room. He was captured the very next day. In the end, James Borman paid with his life, while Brest, Hunter, and Hamilton were all recaptured and returned to Alcatraz with even harsher punishments. 2 more years passed, filled with failed escape attempts that were quickly shut down, until 1946, when one of the most violent and infamous escape attempts in Alcatraz's history took place. It would later become known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Between May 2nd and May 4th, a group of 6 inmates launched a daring and deadly plan. Their names were Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Moran Thompson. The plan began with the inmates taking control of the cell house area. They overpowered several guards and made their way to the armory, seizing every weapon they could get their hands on. Their escape plan? To steal the prison ferry boat and sail to freedom. But there was a problem. They couldn't get the outer prison door open. With their escape route blocked, they chose to fight. A violent standoff erupted. They took 2 guards as hostages, and over the next 2 days, brutal shootouts echoed through the prison. Eventually, Joseph Kretzer shot the hostages, escalating the crisis even further. Realizing their plan had failed, Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes abandoned the escape and returned to their cells. But Coy, Kretzer, and Hubbard refused to surrender. The battle raged on. so fiercely that the US Navy had to intervene. After intense fighting, the military forces stormed the prison and managed to kill all 3 men. In the aftermath, Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes were charged with the murder of the prison guards. Shockley and Thompson were sentenced to death. As for Clarence Carnes, who was just 19 years old at the time, he was given a life sentence. Following this brutal battle, there were a few more escape attempts over the years, but all of them were stopped before they even got off the ground. These failed escapes only reinforced the legend of Alcatraz. That escape was not just impossible, it was a death sentence, but all of that would change in 1962.
It was the quiet summer night of June 11, 1962, when Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin put into motion a plan they had spent months preparing. A bold escape requiring precision, patience, and perfect execution. Frank Morris was the mastermind behind the operation. He handpicked the Anglin brothers because of their exceptional swimming skills, a key part of the escape plan. Each of the 3 inmates had a life story filled with hardship and crime, stories that shaped the kind of men who would even consider escaping from the most secure prison in the world. Frank Morris was born on September 1, 1926. He was orphaned at just 11 years old and spent his youth in foster homes around Washington. His path into crime began early. He committed his first offense at the age of 13, which was only the beginning of a long criminal career, ranging from drug possession to armed robbery and car theft. Every time he was imprisoned, he tried to escape, earning a reputation as the brilliant escape artist. Morris wasn't just bold, he was highly intelligent. He scored 133 on an IQ test, placing him in the top 2% of the population. But it wasn't just his intellect. He had exceptional skills in planning and organization. For him, escaping prison wasn't just survival. It was a challenge, a game. In fact, just a year before Alcatraz, he successfully escaped from a prison in Louisiana where he had been sentenced to 10 years for bank robbery. He managed to stay on the run for a full year before being recaptured while attempting another heist. In January 1960, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz. Authorities believed that this time, they'd finally break his escape streak. But Morris saw it differently. To him, this was simply the ultimate challenge, the hardest level yet. From the moment he arrived, he began studying everything: guard schedules, camera placements, the way the doors opened, every single detail. About a year after Morris arrived at Alcatraz, he received news that 2 familiar names were being transferred to the prison: John Anglin and his younger brother Clarence Anglin. John Anglin was born on May 2, 1930, and Clarence followed exactly 1 year later. They were 2 of 14 siblings, raised in a poor farming family in Georgia. From a young age, the brothers worked in the fields, but they also had a unique talent. They competed in freezing cold lake swimming contests and often won. Despite their natural abilities, poverty pushed them into a life of crime. It started small, stealing chickens, produce, farm supplies, but by the early 1950s, they had graduated to bank robbery. Their robberies were known for being bold, yet careful. They often walked into banks in broad daylight, and according to them, they never carried real weapons. In fact, the only time they were ever seen with a gun, it turned out to be a toy pistol. But on January 17, 1958, while robbing a bank in Columbia, Alabama, they were finally caught. They were sentenced to 35 years in prison. At first, they served time in a Florida state prison, but after a failed escape attempt, they were transferred to the Leavenworth Federal Prison. Another escape attempt landed them in Atlanta Penitentiary, and when they tried to escape from there too, authorities decided enough was enough. They were sent to Alcatraz, the end of the line. John arrived on October 24, 1960. Clarence followed on January 16, 1961. Once reunited with Frank Morris, the old acquaintances quickly formed a strong friendship, especially when the Anglins learned about Morris's legendary reputation for escaping prisons. For Morris, the Anglin brothers were the perfect teammates. He knew about their swimming skills, particularly in cold water. Exactly the kind of men you'd need if you ever planned to swim across the icy waters of San Francisco Bay.
While the three of them quietly studied the prison's weak points, a fourth man entered the picture, Alan West, an inmate whose cell was right next to Morris's. West overheard their discussions and made an offer. He told Morris, "I know a way out, but I want in." West had a job cleaning the top level of the cell block, and one day, while working, he discovered a ventilation shaft that led directly to the roof. When Morris heard this, he knew. This wasn't just a crazy idea anymore. This could work. From that moment on, using his brilliance, Frank Morris began designing one of the most elaborate prison escapes in American history.
After carefully studying the prison's architecture, Morris discovered that the small ventilation grates beneath the sinks in each cell were connected to a network of narrow utility corridors. If they could access those corridors, they could eventually reach the ventilation shaft Alan West had discovered. But there was one major problem. The openings were way too small for a grown man to squeeze through. And that's where the first challenge of the most legendary prison escape in history began. Morris, with his sharp mind, saw an opportunity hidden in Alcatraz's own strength: salt water. The salty sea air that surrounded the island had slowly weakened parts of the concrete walls, especially those behind the ventilation grates. These walls weren't regularly maintained, unlike the more exposed parts of the prison. Morris realized that, with a little patience and a few simple tools, they might just be able to widen the vents enough to crawl through. Their first tool? Soup spoons, stolen one by one from the prison kitchen. These were to be their primary digging tools. But now came the real problem. How do you dig through concrete without anyone noticing? After several discussions, the four escapees came up with a plan. They would only dig during a specific time, between 6:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., the 1 hour when prisoners were allowed to play musical instruments. The noise from the instruments would cover the sounds of digging. They took turns keeping watch, tracking the guards' movements, and after each digging session, they covered the holes with painted cardboard that matched the wall's color, topped with clutter, to make it look completely natural. As the weeks passed, Morris realized they needed something stronger to speed things up. He managed to find an old broken vacuum cleaner in a storage room. From it, he extracted the motor and, using an old saw blade, created a homemade electric drill, crude but effective. By this time, word of the escape had spread among the prison population. Some reports say that over 80 inmates knew what was happening. But none of them snitched. Not only did they want to see the legend of Alcatraz broken, some of them even helped, watching the halls, covering for noise, or offering materials. The plan kept evolving. They crafted lifelike dummy heads using soap, toilet paper, and concrete dust from the walls. Each dummy was carefully painted to match their skin tone and placed on their pillows at night to make it look like they were asleep. Clarence Anglin, who worked in the prison barbershop, collected real human hair from haircuts to glue onto the dummy heads, making them look even more convincing. But now, with the wall breached, came the most important question: how do you survive the icy waters of San Francisco Bay? Then, one day, Morris stumbled upon an article in Popular Mechanics magazine. It explained how to build a rubber raft using simple materials. That's when the final piece of the puzzle clicked. The material for their raft? The heavy winter coats issued to prisoners during the coldest months. These coats were lined with rubberized fabric, and over time, the team managed to secretly collect over 50 of them. They stole an old sewing machine from the prison workshop, and even managed to get steam pipes to heat and fuse the rubber seams. They also smuggled out wood scraps and nails, used to craft makeshift paddles for steering the raft. But now they needed a hidden workspace. That's where Alan West stepped in again. West knew of an abandoned utility corridor inside the prison, an area the guards never inspected. To buy them access, he devised a clever trick. Each day, after digging in his cell, he'd sweep the concrete dust up onto the catwalk, letting it fall onto the guards walking below. Eventually, the guards grew irritated and gave him permission to cover the area with old blankets to stop the dust. Without realizing it, the guards had just helped the escape team cover their secret workshop. The workshop was located directly beneath a ventilation shaft, the original escape route West had discovered months earlier. Day by day, they moved tools and materials into the hidden space, navigating the crawl spaces at night while the prison was quiet. Meanwhile, their dummy heads stayed on the beds, lifelike decoys made of soap,
toilet paper, paint, and real human hair. As the weeks passed, everything began to fall into place. They tested their raft, checked the life vests, and practiced every step of the escape until each man knew his exact role. Then came the night of June 11th, 1962. At around 9 p.m., Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin sat silently in their cells, waiting for the final head count. Once the guards completed their rounds and everything was quiet, they sprang into action. Each man removed the cardboard cover from his wall vent, but something went wrong. Alan West couldn't get out. The cement seal he had used to hide the vent had hardened, and he couldn't break through it in time. After desperately trying for hours, he realized he had missed his only chance. Defeated, he crawled back into bed, left behind. Meanwhile, Morris and the Anglin brothers had already crawled into the escape corridor, climbed through the utility pipes, and made their way up toward the roof. Once outside, they faced another obstacle. High perimeter fences, topped with barbed wire, but they came prepared. Using their stolen tools, they cut through the wire, lowered themselves down the wall, and made their way to the northern shoreline of Alcatraz Island. There, they unfolded their handmade raft. To inflate it, Morris had secretly modified a musical instrument into a silent air pump. Ingenious and quiet. They inflated the raft, climbed aboard, and pushed off into the freezing, violent waters of San Francisco Bay. Their destination, Angel Island, and then the mainland beyond. And as dawn approached, the three men vanished. At exactly 7 a.m., the guards began their usual morning rounds, calling out to each prisoner to wake up. But when they got to the cells of Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin, none of them responded. The guards called again and again. Still, no movement. One guard opened the cell door, and what he found left him speechless. It wasn't a person in the bed. It was a dummy head, complete with real hair and lifelike features. Chaos erupted across Alcatraz. An immediate manhunt was launched across the island and its surrounding waters. The FBI was called in, and within hours, a full-scale federal investigation began. Their first suspect? Alan West, the only member of the escape team who had failed to escape. When agents confronted him about the hole in his cell wall, he broke down and told them everything. His confession led to one of the largest search operations in FBI history. The next morning, search teams found a makeshift paddle floating in the bay, along with some scattered debris from the escape equipment. But there were no bodies, no sign of Morris, John, or Clarence. Later, on Angel Island, investigators discovered a plastic bag containing family photos, some personal items, and maps. It sparked the question: did they make it? Or did the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay claim their lives before they reached land? In the years that followed, the escape became legendary. Many believed the men survived, pointing to unsigned postcards and anonymous letters sent to the Anglin family over the years. In fact, John and Clarence's mother used to receive mysterious letters with no return address. And at her funeral, two strange women were seen attending. Dressed in black, faces partly covered. Some believed those women were John and Clarence in disguise. In 1975, a photograph surfaced in Brazil showing two men resembling the Anglin brothers. But nothing conclusive ever came from it. The FBI eventually closed the case after 15 years, officially stating that the three men most likely drowned. But then came one final twist. In 2013, the FBI received a letter. It read, "My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with Frank Morris and my brother Clarence. I'm 83 years old and have cancer. I want to turn myself in exchange for medical treatment." Authorities dismissed the letter as a hoax, but it left one lingering question. What if it was real? To this day, no bodies have ever been found. No definitive evidence has proven whether they survived or perished. But one thing is certain. On the night of June 11th, 1962, three men shattered the myth that Alcatraz was escape-proof. And that brings us to the end of this unbelievable story. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more insane real-life mysteries. And hey, if there's a story you want us to cover, leave it in the comments below.